Hidden Gems, Episode 37, Leo Colovini Games with Gidorah. Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
I'm Jason.
I'm Cameron.
And I'm Gidorah, Chris. Can we put in a little beady in post?
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's kaiju talk for hello.
He's on, he's live, and it only took us 45 minutes to get going.
Welcome to the show.
We did it.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is an honor. I really appreciate it.
We're super pumped to have you on the show. Yeah, when our show first started, I was really doubtful how long we were going to last and actually be a podcast and if we would even have any relevance in the podcast space. But there were a few people that latched on to us really early. And you were one of those people that kept us going through that initial phase of where we were wondering if we were even going to have an audience.
Yeah, so, honestly, at that stage, I feel like it was like, do we bring this guy on to do guild stuff if we don't even know if we're going to survive for like another 4 episodes? But yeah, it's been
it's all thanks to Ravindra. Oddly enough, I don't listen to Heavy Cardboard or follow them very much, but I remember randomly something coming up in my BGG feed on the Heavy Cardboard Guild, and Ravindra saying, "Oh, some friends of mine just started a podcast focusing on older games," and I was like, "Finally." There's more content out there for the older, the unappreciated.
That's awesome. Ravindra coming through for the podcast again. He sold me 100 of his old games, and he brought us Gidorah. I mean,
he took your money and brought you me.
A lot of my money.
Cool. Well, definitely excited to have you on the show. I feel like everybody that we have on the show for the first time, we always want to get to know them a little bit. And we're getting to know you even right now through this call. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the hobby.
Yeah, so my career and games are kind of intertwined in a weird way. So after I graduated from university, I decided randomly to be an English teacher and teach English in Japan.
Okay.
So that took me on a whirlwind tour. I was there for 3 years, taught English in Thailand after that for a bit. And I came back to the U.S. I was living in San Francisco with a friend, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. I was this close to getting an MBA and started teaching English on the side in the meantime. And I was like, I just really like teaching English. Maybe I should just get my master's degree in that. And right about that time is when I met my now wife, who's Korean. She was in the US, just taking a break from doing her master's degree. And I was like, well, great. When I finish getting my master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages, I'm going to South Korea. When I got to Korea, they've got a huge board gaming culture. There are board game cafes all over the place. And so I was looking to meet people, looking to do something that I've always been interested in, and fell down the rabbit hole of attending meetups, checking out BGG more regularly and going like, what's this game? What's that game? I gotta play it all. And very slippery slope. So we ended up getting married in Korea and lived there for 4.5 years and finally got the itch to move on, do something new, and came back to the US. And it's a little bit harder to teach English here, obviously, at least to make it pay. So I switched over to something I had done on the side in other English teaching schools, which was human rendering. So that's what I do now. And got a great game group where I live in Reno, Nevada. So got to shout out my fellow gamers, Joe and Seaweight and Brinker. I don't think they listen, but
cool.
Is that anywhere near
awesome.
Sparks, Nevada? We track our listens, and we have a massive quantity of listens from Sparks, Nevada. Is that close?
That's me. That's me, man.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
That's awesome.
Nice.
So
I'm
cool.
jealous that people in your board game group have cool nicknames like Brinker.
That's his real name.
Really? This is his first name?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a family name. I think he told me it's Dutch.
Oh,
cool.
okay. That's even cooler. I was just
That
thinking
is
like
cool.
you guys have this cool gang of really coolly named people, and we just have boring names like Cameron.
Well, the only reason we call the other guy Seaweight is because his name's also Chris. So it was just easier.
Reno, the world's biggest little city, right?
Yeah. Biggest little mistake.
The only reason I know that is from the movie The Wizard, by the way.
So do you have any other hobbies or anything else that you're into outside of board gaming?
Yeah, well, living abroad, one thing I got into is they have a type of alcohol there, and it's got a lot of different names. I'm sure you guys are familiar with soju. We're probably familiar with that.
No.
I've
seeing
heard
some
of it.
blank faces.
Don't
Okay.
know much about it.
Yeah. So you go out to a bar, you're probably drinking soju, which is similar to vodka, sweeter, lower alcohol content, but still quite strong. You're talking maybe, I want to say 25%. I might be talking out of my rear there. But yeah, I was like, well, what else is there? And they've got a drink there called makgeolli, which is a fermented rice wine, or I've heard people say fermented rice beer. So I was like, well, can I make that? How hard is that? And there's a group of foreigners there who worked in coordination with a local brewery school, and they're putting on English classes. And so I started attending those. You can walk out of there with a plastic bucket that's full of rice, and in a couple of weeks, it'll turn into booze. And what's great is, I don't know if you guys have ever brewed beer or made wine, but it's idiot proof. I've never brewed anything in my life. And it's like, you put the rice in, you put the water in, you put the fermenter, which is called a nuduk, and 2 weeks later, like I said, you've got booze.
That's great. You're just giving Cameron something else to get into. It's awesome. Well, Gidorah, before we let you off the hook, I'm very quickly just going to ask you some rapid fire questions as I do. I did it to my wife when she was on the podcast, so it's only fair that you get the same treatment. And just off the cuff,
yourself.
Quick questions. The people want to know. All right. These are burning questions. All right. What is your favorite game?
Favorite game, and one I'm hoping Hidden Gems talks about, is probably Maharaja, the game of palace building in India. Kramer and Kiesling. Old school area control game. That was my pick for a long time. It's got its rough edges. I know it's not a perfect game, but I do have a real big soft spot in my heart for that game.
I just picked up the old school version with glass beads and everything at Origins.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
Excited to give it a try.
All right. What's your least favorite game?
Tough. It's not fair to dunk on this game, but
it is.
I don't know. I really don't like Evolution. I just think that game is is so boring. The promise of going to the watering hole sounds cool, but I don't know. There's something about that game where I'm just like, what are we doing? Ethnos is another one. I think it's a game of just top decking and having a really boring time.
Awesome. How many games do you hold in your collection?
I've got just a little bit over 80 right now.
Whoa. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
When I heard this question, the only thing I thought about was, did we ask Talia that one? And what did she say?
Right.
Technically,
I've got 80 in my downstairs closet that Talia doesn't know about that I hide from her.
Yeah, that was the 80
we asked
you got
Talia
from
if she knew how many you had in your collection.
That's right. That's what it was.
Yeah, she lowballed it by about 300.
Yeah. That's a sizable collection, though.
Yeah.
80 games is certainly nothing to sneeze at. It's probably bigger than
I got less of a
most
chance
serious gamers.
I have less of a chance to game, so even some of those, there's probably 10 games I haven't played yet, and ones that need a lot more plays.
Keep that collection lean. I like it. And then lastly, do you have any games that you would consider a grail game that people would be like, man, I wish I had a copy of that game? Do you have anything super rare?
Yeah, the original Metropolis copy is probably pretty rare. Doing a little research on Bridges of Shangri-La, a game you may or may not hear about soon. That's another one that is quite hard to come by. Fresh Fish.
Yeah.
The Friedman Friese game.
Yep.
Yeah, that one's pretty hard to find. I do have a pretty cool Taiwanese copy of Modern Art. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but there's an impressionist artist from Taiwan that they kind of wanted to celebrate, one of these Taiwanese publishers. And so they reworked a lot of his pieces and used that for modern art. So that one's pretty cool. I think that one's pretty different.
Awesome. All right. That's all I got. You're off the hot seat, man. I took it easy on you.
That was pretty easy. Yeah, that was pretty easy. I'll admit. I was expecting to hear more superhero stuff or favorite bourbons.
Questions about started. Random BGG facts.
Don't get me fired up.
Cool. Well, so as usual, we have our cocktail, but because we're all remote for this episode, we had to get a little creative. So we decided that we were going to all come up with our own, well, not design our own cocktail. That'd be a disaster, at least for me. But we were going to all find our own cocktail and make it for this episode. So Cameron, you want to lead us off? I guess the theme, at least I tried to stick with an Italian theme because of our subject matter for the episode. Right. But if you deviated from that, that's fine too, Cameron.
So, yeah, I got a little bit off theme, but I just went with it. I picked a drink that I hadn't had in a while, but that I knew I had the ingredients for. And I apologize, I don't actually know the proper way to pronounce this. Oaxaca? Oaxaca?
Huaca.
There you go. See, I knew I didn't know how to pronounce it. Huaca, old fashioned. So this recipe, I tweaked it a little bit because what I read online didn't sound like it was going to be that good. So what I did is 1 ounce of reposado tequila, 1 ounce of mezcal, and just shy of a half ounce of agave with a couple dashes of Angostura bitters and a couple, maybe 3 dashes of my homebrewed grapefruit bitters and a orange peel garnish. And it is tasty. Not too sweet. Still a little smoky from the mezcal. It's nice.
What does that have to do with Leo Colovini?
Absolutely nothing. I just wanted to have it.
Yeah, you said you went off theme a little bit. I'd say that's like about as
I went
opposite
entirely off theme and I did whatever I wanted.
Cameron's like, who's Leo Colovini? No idea.
Oh, yeah. I did no research. I was like, oh, that sounds good. I haven't had that guy in a long time. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, Gidorah, what'd you make?
Oh man, well, Cameron and I are on the same wavelength in honor of being on Hidden Gems and thinking about some old dusties. And because of what I had in my liquor cabinet, I also made an old fashioned.
Nice.
But I just went the traditional route, 4 roses single barrel and some brown sugar and the orange peel. And yeah. And
delicious.
Who doesn't like an old fashioned?
Oh man,
I got to try that mezcal version though. That's
good. A Hidden Gems favorite.
It's a great alternative. Oh yeah,
I like the smoke.
I finally got some Jaeger, and I've been back on the Jaeger old fashions recently too.
I got to admit that does not sound good. I guess you got to try it before you rate it.
All right. Well, getting back on theme, since we're talking about Leo Colovini tonight, if you don't know, he's an Italian board game designer. So I went with an Italian cocktail. The name of this one is called an Amalfi Mule from the Amalfi Coast in Italy. I love a good mule. So it's strawberries, basil leaves, limoncello, lemon juice, and then ginger beer.
Nice.
Sounds delicious.
Dang,
I really did
really
want to
good.
make it, but I don't keep a bottle of limoncello in my freezer.
Yeah, that's one of my snooty liqueurs.
Yeah, I had none of those ingredients, but I tried to stay on theme a little bit. I did about 10 seconds worth of Leo Colovini research and discovered that he's from Venice. And so I Googled Venetian cocktails, and the first thing that came up was the Veneziano Spritz. It's Prosecco, Aperol, seltzer water, and a little bit of orange. So
Nice.
It's pretty refreshing.
Nice. All right. So as we're concluding our banter here, why don't we go ahead and transition, since we've been talking about Leo Colovini, our featured designer tonight. Give a shout out to Gidorah here before I get started. He helped me a little bit with the research for this particular part of the episode. I will say it was not easy to find things on Leo Colovini. Did you have that experience, Gidorah?
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot out there, or if there is, maybe it's all in Italian.
It's in Italian. Yes, I did experience that. But we did find a little bit. But he's definitely underappreciated and doesn't get enough spotlight for sure. We'll try to give him a little bit of credit here. So Leo Colovini, born in 1964 in Venice, Italy. So he's 58 years old as of this recording. He started playing games as a child with his older brother. They played Risk, not surprisingly, as a lot of people do when they're younger. But he also mentioned a few other games that I had never heard of. So one is Subbuteo, Concilia, and Cheyenne. So Subbuteo, I actually looked this up on BGG. It's a soccer game. It's a dexterity game where the soccer players have like a round bottom and you flick them across the pitch into the ball and into each other to play soccer. Subbuteo. He says that his life in board games was forever changed by meeting Alex Randolph, which if you don't know, Alex Randolph is a classic board game designer. Most people think of Sid Saxon when they think of classic board game designers, and rightfully so, but Alex Randolph would be right up there with him. They were kind of contemporaries, and he's got a lot of classic older designs. Probably his most famous design would be a game called Twixt. Code 777 is another one that he's designed you may have heard of. And
Ricochet Robots.
What's that?
Oh, sorry. Ricochet Robots is another one that's definitely worth mentioning.
A co-design with Leo Colovini, actually.
That sounds really fun.
Ricochet is?
I believe so. They designed it
really?
together, I think.
Oh, wow.
Maybe. Could be wrong about that, but I think they did. So Leo Colovini met Alex Randolph at the age of 12 while playing chess at a chess club in Venice. Colovini says that Alex Randolph taught him and his friends a game he designed called Mad Mate, which is a variant of chess, actually. And Colovini was just so impressed that this guy took an established game like chess and tweaked the rules into a totally new game that kind of inspired him to become his own game designer. So they started a friendship there, and he actually started play testing for Alex Randolph and was constantly bouncing ideas off of him as he was growing up. They finally published a game together in 1986, a game called Drachenfels, a super popular game with an average rating of 4.9 on BGG. It's ranked 21,050. Sounds like Hidden Gems material.
I looked into this game a little bit. It's got these wild kind of, I don't know what material they're made out of, maybe paper or
even rainbows.
Vinyl. Yeah, the rainbows, and they pop off the board. I think you move them around. I don't know. It sounded really, really different.
It looks nuts. Yeah, crazy. 2 years later, though, they stepped their game up a little bit and they co-designed Incognito, which was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres for most beautiful game, interestingly. So not for game of the year, but it was kind of one of those special categories. But Incognito is a well-known game even still today, and one that we should review on the podcast at some point, I think. In 1993, he's left his full-time job working in a bank to work full-time in the gaming industry, including creating the published company Venice Connection. So in a lot of these old-school Euro-style games like Incognito, you'll see Venice Connection. Magna Grecia would be an example of this as well, and that's actually Leo Colovini and Alex Randolph's board game company that they started together. Just generally, from a board game design standpoint, he describes himself, and I quote, as he likes to create games with the most possible depth with the least possible rules. I love it.
Like right up our alley, yeah.
Speaking my language. He currently has 100 game design credits on BGG. He considers his most underrated games to be Alexandros, Submarine, and the Dutch Golden Age, Jason.
Ooh, yeah.
Which I know you have, and we need to review on the podcast at some point. Some of his other favorite games are Catan, Twixt, and Acquire. And he says that generally speaking, newer games don't do much for him. So he doesn't really play new stuff. And I think that's because he just really has latched onto this idea of fewer rules, which I think in a lot of newer designs, it's just getting more and more rules heavy. Not all cases, but generally speaking, he likes the simpler designs. And that's about it. That's all I have on him. Did I miss anything, Chris?
So it looks like Alex Randolph is the sole designer on Ricochet Robots.
Okay. I will cut that part out of my banter so I don't sound like a fool.
I don't want anybody to start writing emails.
Oh, they'll come after me, man.
We don't even have comments.
All right, cool. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Let's get into the games.
Love it.
Woo. Lost in the Fae and haunted by enigmatic spirits, the brave druids of the Barwitha clan gather to perform sacred rituals in honor of these mystic denizens. Appeasing the creatures may be critical to the clan's survival in this extraordinary realm. In Fae, 2 to 4 players assume the roles of wayward spirits within the mystic realm of the Fae, obscuring their identities from each other while influencing and luring the lost druids throughout the sacred lands. As the spirits lead groups of druids together, the druids perform rituals that award points. At the end of the game, players reveal their hidden identities, and the player with the most points wins.
That was all flavor text?
Yep.
That was a lot of flavor text.
I think you read some of the game overview.
You just read the rulebook, the entire rulebook.
Hey, it looked like 3 different paragraphs.
It's the italicized words, bro. Come on.
Well, then just cut it.
I'm messing with you, man. I love it.
I'm like so scared that I'm going to wake my son up if I get too dramatic on these flavor text readings tonight because he's like 15 feet that way.
Everything's got to be real raspy.
Yeah, exactly. Everything
Faye.
leads back to David Attenborough.
That is exactly who it is. I didn't pick that up. Oh my god.
I have to
Now
remind
I'm
myself
wondering what you're
consciously
going to do
not
for
to.
Magna Grecia because
Probably David Attenborough.
yeah, no, that's what I thought.
Cameron's
All
in a
right.
rut.
In a rut.
Faye, designed in 2018 by Z-Man Games, also known as Clans, designed in 2002. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 4,800. I will point out that Clans ranking at the time of this recording is 1,631. Designer of this game, obviously, Leo Colovini. I will mention, before we get into the rules very briefly, this game was also recommended to us to review by some of our listeners. So James Geist from Dad's on a Map recommended this game to us to review as well. And then Tim Bovelander, who we haven't given a shout out to yet, but he's given us some recommendations. So thank you, Tim, for the recommendation. Guys, this review's for y'all. All right, brief rule summary for Faye. Faye is an area majority or area influence game of sorts where the players are trying to navigate their druids on the board into groups with other druids in order to perform rituals and score points. The game board depicts a fantasy landscape divided into 60 spaces made up of 12 different 5-space regions. Each space in a region depicts one of 5 different terrain types one time. At the start of the game, the board is somewhat randomly populated with 60 druid miniatures in 5 different player colors, so 12 druids per player. Before play begins, the players will be dealt a face-down secret roll card depicting which color the player will be for the current game. A player's turn is exceedingly simple in Fae. All you do is take all of the druids present in one space on the board and move them into a neighboring connected space, combining them with any druids that are already present in that space. That's it. The only stipulations are that you cannot move druids into empty spaces, and if a group consists of 7 or more druids, it can no longer be moved. However, it can still be moved into. So why are we grouping up all of these different colored druids? Well, to form rituals, of course, as druids do. So if, after a player takes their turn, a group of druids is present in a space that is no longer adjacent to any other spaces containing druids, so it's isolated, a scoring ritual will occur. The players will add up the number of druids present in that scoring group, and each color represented in that group will move their score marker up that corresponding number of spaces. So, simplest example, let's say you have 3 orange and 2 yellow druids in a space. So you add up, that's 5 total druids. Orange and yellow will move up 5 spaces each. Notice that it does not matter that orange has more druids in the space. They all move up the same number. Couple of quick caveats. If every player color is represented in the group, and this is very interesting, all of the singles are removed prior to scoring. So if we had 3 orange and 2 yellow, and then all the other colors represented once, all those singles would be removed and would not score. Additionally, there are scoring cards present on the side of the board that range from 1 up to 5 points, and they have 2 different types of terrain on them, matching the terrains printed on the different spaces of the board. One of these terrains on the card is a blessed terrain, and the other is cursed. If the ritual occurs on blessed terrain, it will score extra points as printed on the scoring card. However, if it occurs on the cursed terrain shown on the card, the ritual fails, and all of the druids in that group score 0 points. It should be noted the scoring cards must be taken in ascending order, and they are the game timer. So once all the cards are taken, the game will end at that point. The players will then reveal their identities and add 1 point to their color score for each scoring card they collected over the course of the game. Most points wins the game. And that's generally how you play Fae or Clans. So we've actually been on a bit of a streak here on Hidden Gems where we've been reviewing games with hidden roles. And when we say that, we don't necessarily mean social deduction games like Secret Hitler or Resistance. You know, we reviewed games like Heimlich & Co., The Name of the Rose, where you have a hidden role, but it's not social deduction where you're accusing people. You're just trying to figure out who people are around the table. It's more of like a logic deduction style game. So this game is like that, obviously. You start the game, everybody gets a hidden role, your pieces are spread out on the board, and to start, nobody knows who anybody is. So my question would be to you, how well do you feel like this game implements that hidden role aspect. Do you feel like it really mattered? Were you concerned with your hidden role? What are your thoughts on that part of the game? Anybody?
I'll go first. All right, so I haven't played Heimlich & Co. or Name of the Rose or some of the other games that you guys have been talking about, but I would imagine, unlike other games where you have hidden roles, it's relatively easy to mask what you're doing in Fey. Move one of your pieces into a curse zone, you could just be on your way out the next turn, or another player could move you out. Or if you move a piece into a good zone, maybe you're just trying to pump up the score. So there's a lot of ambiguity when you make moves as to what your piece could be. Now that narrows down as the game goes on.
Mm-hmm.
But initially, you see somebody moving a black into a good zone, into a bad zone, into a zone where it doesn't matter. It's impossible to tell what that means.
You don't know what they're trying to do by taking that move. That was definitely how I felt about this game as well. You don't feel nearly as exposed, especially as a game like Heimlich & Co. or Name of the Rose, particularly Name of the Rose, because in that game, if you put your hand on a color, everyone's thinking like, oh, if he's given that one an advantage, he's probably that color. And this one, it's like, you just moved it. I don't really know. And if you move 2 or 3 colors, maybe he's one of those, or maybe he's trying to move all 3 of those away from his color, and it's one of these 3 that it just got moved away from. Who knows?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this when we went through Heimlich & Co. and Name of the Rose, about how I'm somehow always end up being super obvious in games like this, unbeknowingly. And so I would say I agree with that. I think it is easier to hide in this game. I think there are still some key moments where you can still be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Because I found myself doing that, of course, because I'm apparently terrible at these types of games. But you can definitely pick up on it. Those kind of make or break moments of like, well, this big group is about to form. It's about to score. I have to do something about it.
Yes.
And so you make that move to try to do something about it. And then it's blatantly obvious, right?
Yeah, I do think that you can definitely figure out who people are in this game, and depending on how they're playing, pretty early if they're too obvious. And
pretty much
you can force
what
people.
He means is that he can figure out what color I am every time.
Well, last time we played this, I knew within the first 2 moves, I think. You were in a bad spot. You can find yourself in a tough situation in this game where you're like, am I really going to let these guys get wiped out and not score? Or am I not going to be involved at all in this scoring?
Yeah.
And moves that you make can absolutely out you for sure. Yeah. Now, my question would be, I wonder how much it matters.
Yeah.
Because in games like Heimlich & Co., you can get crushed if people know who you are. You will get punished.
There's an end of game scoring associated with it, and that's not present in this game.
Yeah, if people peg you, they will score a lot of points. In this game, that penalty is not as severe, which I think maybe takes a little bit of the teeth away from this game.
It's non-existent, right?
I'd push back on that a little bit because
push back.
I mean, because one of the things that I'm trying to do is group players' pieces together, right? So if I suspect Cameron's black, I'm going to try to push as many blacks together into one group because that's limiting his scoring opportunities, right?
Yep.
If I can put 2, 3 blacks in one space, even if it gets isolated, even if he gets the card or the token for that extra point, I've just given him 1 less or 2 less scoring opportunities.
Right.
No, and I think you're right. I guess I should have reworded that differently to say that I didn't think it had teeth. I guess maybe it's just not quite as harsh as the other 2 games we were comparing to, but I understand that you said you haven't played those, but you are correct. There are things that people can do to you on the board to hurt you for sure. I just maybe felt like it wasn't quite as severe as some of the other ones we played, but I don't disagree.
So the thing that I always struggle with in games like this is the level of control that you have between your turns, right? So I'm curious your thoughts on this because I'm starting to become convinced that maybe I'm just bad at these types of games. But it seemed to me, I don't think there's much room for strategy in this game because any type of long-term planning you're trying to do is likely to be foiled. And that, Chris is shaking his head.
I don't know if I agree with that, but anyway, go ahead.
I'm with you, Jason. I think you're right. I think it's mainly tactical.
And I think in tactical games, generally your goal is, okay, well, I'm going to take advantage of my current turn situation and try to gain as much from that turn as possible. My struggle with this was that taking moves that were not a scoring move felt like, well, I'm going to give it my best guess and I'm going to hope that this works out. And sometimes it would, and more often than not, it did not. Like, oh, I'm going to move this guy over here because I'm going to try to get him away from this one color that's going to mess up my scoring. And then it goes boom, boom, boom around the table, and everything's completely different. And people just shoved everything in the opposite direction from what I was trying to do. So I think that's where I struggled with the control in this, but I'm interested to hear Chris's thoughts now, because I know he has an opinion here.
So I won't wax too long on this particular statement because I feel like I could just fall down a deep rabbit hole here. But I will say, I feel like this game is a game of subtle maneuvering where, yes, I am acting tactically in the moment at times. However, I felt like I was constantly keeping an eye on all my pieces and how the board was just slowly morphing over time and trying to shuttle them into areas where mostly I wouldn't get screwed. Sometimes it might get out of your control, but I don't know. I guess just looking at the game board as a whole, I felt like I wasn't just looking at the board and finding the best move for me in the moment, but I was thinking more of what if this happens, or what if this glob combines with this glob, and thinking more in a longer term basis too. Again, that's as detailed as I think I can be without the listeners being completely confused, because there is a lot of subtlety here, but I do feel like that there was some strategy here personally. There's one more thing I wanted to point out, which I really enjoyed before we move on. And I wonder if y'all picked up on this too. We've been talking a lot about the hidden roles and identifying who each person is so that we can punish each other, which I think is valid and a fun part of games like this. But one thing that I started to pick up on was identifying who the neutral player was and using that to my advantage. If you can figure out who the dummy player is, you can use that person basically to boost your score, right? If you're moving them into places where you are, you know you're not helping somebody else, right?
Right.
So there were games where if I was pretty sure who the dummy player was, I was using that to my advantage, which I think is another cool thing about the hidden role aspect of this game. Is not just the punishment aspect, but also the benefit in myself aspect, which I thought was pretty neat.
And you're sort of veiling as well who you actually are.
Right. You might think I'm the dummy player at that point, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
You could be totally hiding that way because you're constantly moving around orange and because you think orange is the dummy.
Right. Right. All right. So some good things, some interesting things. We mentioned a few cons, I think, as well. Anybody else have anything glaring or anything they wanted to mention that they didn't particularly enjoy about Fae?
I've never even seen what Clans looks like, but Fae seems like it may have some design issues in terms of colors. On a few occasions, it was difficult for multiple players to determine what color they actually were from looking just at their card. Not to pick on him, because I do think I'm bringing this up as an issue. Like Bill once played a game where he thought he was purple, but he was actually gray because his card has purple tones in it and it wasn't super obvious. So I think there could probably be some optimization there.
I wonder if it's the gray-green card, because we actually had to restart a game because somebody was like, I got this card, I don't know what color I am.
Right.
And you're like, I had to look at it. And then I had to see it against the other color to go, oh, this is the gray and this is the green. Yeah.
Yeah. That raised an interesting question in that game, too, because I think Bill nearly won that game as gray, even though he was playing purple.
Not knowing he was gray.
and nearly won the game as gray.
On top of that, each region is separated by these very jagged lines. If anyone's ever played Inish, it kind of looks like that. Understanding where those territories begin and end is really difficult. And we're talking about small little strips, little corners of one region connecting to another region where we'd have to stop and go.
Centimeter.
Right. Is that connected? I think so.
And you don't necessarily want to be pointing to specific sections of the board and be like, what's this one right here next to this purple one? I'm not purple, but maybe I'm not. But this one right here, can I move over there?
Yeah, totally agree. Problematic for sure.
And I don't know if you guys want to mention it, but those druids look like uncircumcised penises.
Oh, yes, they do.
we talked about that extensively. Yeah.
We'll have to figure out how to tastefully cover this subject, but
60 little phalluses.
I'm moving all my boys to this region. Moving all my boys over here.
I love that we didn't talk about this beforehand, and you still made that.
Yeah,
you made that connection, because we absolutely did.
We had so many laughs about that.
All right, so some good discussion here. We'll go ahead and go into final thoughts, but before we do, it's been a hot minute since I've gone through our grading scale. I feel bad about this. I have no doubt that people listen to our show, new listeners, and are like, what does a 5 even mean? And I dropped the ball on that. So we're going to go over it right now, since we've got Chris K on the show with us, just to review. So on Hidden Gems, we rate on a 1 to 6 scale, with 1 being the lowest and 6 being the highest. If we give a game a 1, we don't like the game, and we don't like it because we think that there's something wrong with the design. It's mechanically broken in some way. A 2, we also don't like the game, but it's not because we think there's something wrong with the design. We just don't like the game. We think it stinks. We don't enjoy it. It's not for us. A 3 is what we call the meh game. It's just okay. There's nothing wrong with it necessarily. We don't hate it, but it's not something that we're really desiring to play. We're not really reaching for it. 4, this is where we start getting into the good stuff. We like games that we give a 4 to. We think they're good games. We enjoy them. If somebody's like, hey, you want to play that? We're like, sure, let's get it out and play it. 5, excellent game, above average. These are games we reach for and say, hey, let's play this game. It's really good. We actively want to get to the table. And then 6, our favorite games that stand out above all the rest, games that we really enjoy, our top games. All right. With that being said, initiation time. Chris, kick us off. Okay. Final thoughts on Faye.
All right. So because you can't see where opponents are trying to help or hurt you, you kind of just have to push buttons in Faye. You have to make assumptions and hope the way the board is shaped is to your benefit, which isn't to say there isn't any control, but it's certainly diminished in Faye, which is why I think makes for a solid 2-player abstract game, a good 3-player game, and kind of just a wild ride in a 4-player game. I think the opacity will be a detractor for newer players. My wife, she's played 5 times and still says she doesn't know what she should do on a turn. And I think the lack of bold, exciting swings may be a letdown for more experienced players. But personally, I feel like I fall into the latter camp. I like Faye, but it's the definition of a game that's maybe lacking a little special sauce. So I give it a 4. I do like it, but I have some caveats for people if they're thinking about getting into it.
All right. Cameron.
So I will say that Faye grew on me over multiple plays. I wonder if it's a bit limited in terms of how interesting it can ultimately get with more plays, just because it is so simple to play. I think it does a good job for what it's trying to do, and I appreciate that it isn't a terribly complex or lengthy game. I'm not sure if it quite cuts it for me in terms of whether I think it's what I would consider good, though. When I start asking a fun question and whether I'd like to play this rather than other games, I probably have to say not so much. If someone were eager to get it out, I'd play. So that probably puts it in like 3 territory for me. And I think I feel okay leaving it there. When I think of games that are themed like this and feel similar, I think of Die Dolmengatter. And I would definitely prefer to play that instead of Faye. So okay. I'm going to leave it at 3.
It's even got druids.
It's even got druids, yeah.
Picking herbs, laying down.
Yeah.
Okay. Jason.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that comparison to Die Dolmengatter. Not just the druid thing, but they do have some similarities. I think I struggled with that control. And I know that that is a theme for me that I come back to regularly, but I think that this game exhibited that more strongly than I've seen in some of the other games that we've played. It felt like occasionally there would be a tactical opportunity to make a good play on my turn. If there's not, then you're trying to take your best guess and hope that things work out better the next time around and that you have a good move that you can make on your turn. And that could be inexperience or lack of knowledge of how to play, but I think that that also speaks a little bit to some of the other things that we've been discussing. Of Chris K was saying his wife doesn't know what move to make on her turn, right? I think that speaks to some of that. There isn't always an obvious choice of what is a good move in this game.
Good.
Because a good move, what?
That's good.
Yes and no. It's good. It's good if there is a good move and it's just not obvious. It's not good if all moves are relatively equal in terms of their goodness, and it just comes back around to what happens in between your turns, right? And so I think that's where I struggled with it. I don't think it's a bad game. but it's not one that I would go to often, I don't think. So I settled on a 3 for this one.
Okay. So for me, I've mentioned before many times on this show that I do like games that have a good bit of subtlety to them. And I think this is definitely one of those games. It's very subtle. We've mentioned the turns in this game are exceedingly simple. You're literally taking a druid or group of druids and moving them into an adjacent area. That's it. And you may think, how much strategy could there be in that? I'm of the opinion that I think there is a good bit. For me personally, the more I played this game, the better it got. This game went from a 3 to a 4 to a 5 for me. It just got better and better. And I think it's just because I was seeing more and more as I was playing it. I don't disagree that on your turn, there are tactical opportunities. But for me, the game got better when I started to see subtle moves I could make to ensure in some cases that later down the road, I could get involved in the scoring and actually get the better end of it. Moving your druids in such a way and other players' druids in such a way that you're safeguarding against bad things happening to you or ensuring bad things might happen to your opponents. I think that those opportunities are many in this game. And I know I think I might be unique there, but I'm pretty convinced, at least in my own mind, that that is true. And that's why I did ultimately fall on a 5 for this game. The only thing that bothered me about this game, and I mentioned earlier, is I do feel like getting found out could be a little bit more painful than it is. But as you all know, I'm masochistic in that way, and I like it. If people are able to peg your color, there'll be some sort of penalty. But outside of that,
You also like that because you love punishing people because you're really, really good at figuring out who your opponents are in these games. It's uncanny. Everyone else struggles with it. You're like, this is who you are. This is who you are. I don't know how you're so good at that, but I can understand why you would want it to be more punishing.
And I think if you have that hanging over your head,
yeah,
it just adds to the tension, right? Like you're even second guessing yourself more about not trying to be too obvious. So
right.
Outside of that, I think this game is excellent. I really do. I liked it a lot. For me, I'm going to give it a 5.
Cool. Where can we find Fae or clans for that matter?
Yeah, so for Fae, it's not a very old game. Like I mentioned, I think it was published in 2018, so it's still very available. There are multiple copies on Noble Knight. So if you want to pick up the game at our sponsors at Noble Knight, you can use our discount code there, 22 gems, get 10% off your order. We would appreciate that very much. Outside of that, there's only one copy on the BGG Marketplace, so good place to get it would be Noble Knight, actually. If you prefer to play the older edition with the, according to Chris, better graphic design, a little bit less confusing, Clans is also available on the BGG Marketplace. 10 copies available there as well.
And those are our thoughts on Clans.
Nice.
Oh, we're doing Fae. I got my mind's been set on Clans the whole night. All right, take 10.
Take 3.
And those are our thoughts on Fae.
All right. Long ago, the villages of Shangri-La were inhabited by the wisest people in the world. One day, however, these wise people all disappeared mysteriously, with only one remaining. The invisible Bridge Blaster. As soon as the news of the disappearance spread, the mountain people of the surrounding high valleys sent their most astute masters and their most knowledgeable students on a great pilgrimage to the villages. They were to ensure that in the future, their own culture would prevail in Shangri-La.
Bridges and stuff.
Bridges and things.
There you go.
The Bridge Blaster.
A Bridge Blaster. That one caught me off guard.
Caught me off guard too. I mean, it makes sense with the game. I guess you're blowing up bridges, but I mean,
there's a reason
the character in the story.
There's a reason I read these before recording them on the show, because I would have just literally burst out laughing the first time that I read it. I was like, Bridge Blaster. Sounds like something from Mega Man. Oh yeah, the invisible Bridge Blaster, or actually from like very early Dragon Ball. The Bridge Blaster? No.
All right. Rule summary for Bridges of Shangri-La. So this was published in 2003 by Cosmos, designed, of course, by Leo Colovini, currently ranked on BGG 1676. So in this game, you are...
Can I interrupt you? I'm interrupting you.
Yes.
Shout out to our BGG Guild, recommended to us by Paul Suyat, our very own Gidorah, obviously. I don't know if you remember that or not, Chris, but you recommended we review this game. And Wesley Vandenberg, faithful member of the Guild for a very long time. So thanks for the recommendations, guys. All right, Jason, go ahead.
All right. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. So in the Bridges of Shangri-La, the board is comprised of a network of 13 different villages that are connected to each other by paths, each of which has a bridge piece in the middle of it. Each village has the same set of 7 different square icon spaces arranged in a somewhat circular pattern, so each village looks exactly the same. Each player is going to begin the game with 42 square tiles in their player color, 6 each of the 7 different icons, which are supposed to represent thematically, I guess, different areas of study for these masters or wizards or whatever they are that are migrating between villages. Each player will start the game with 7 of their own tiles on the board. Each space on the board can hold a maximum of 2 tiles. A single tile in a space represents a master. A second tile on top of a master represents that master's student and must be the same color as the tile underneath. The goal of the game is to have the most spaces on the board containing your player's colored tiles. A player's turn is super simple in this game. You can do one of 3 things. You can place a single master tile into any village where you already have at least 1 tile. You can place 1 or 2 student tiles on top of already placed master tiles, as long as the icons match. Or you can begin the journey of the students. This is the most complicated action, but this is where the meat of the action comes in. To perform the journey of the students, a player will choose a village and take all student tiles from that village and move them across any available bridge to a neighboring village. And those tiles will move to their respective matching icon spaces in that new village. Students that move to an unoccupied space will become masters in that new space. And students that move to an occupied space, one of 2 different things will happen. If the destination village is weaker than the source village, the incoming students will replace the existing master, and the existing master will be returned to its owner. If the destination village is stronger, the migrating student is simply returned to its owner's supply. So what does it mean, weaker or stronger? A village is considered stronger than its neighbor if it has more masters. As a result of the migration, the bridge between the 2 villages is broken by, of course, the bridge blaster. And that bridge is removed from the game, and movement along that path can no longer happen for the rest of the game. At the moment that a village no longer has any standing bridges connecting it to its neighbors, it receives a stone of the wise men and can no longer be interacted with in any way. And once all of the stones that are available at the beginning of the game have been placed out onto the board, the game ends. And at that point, the player who has the most spaces on the board with their player colors tiles in it wins the game. And that is pretty much entirely how you play the Bridges of Shangri-La.
Yep.
So one thing that we've talked a lot about on this podcast are games with shared incentives. So we talked about this a lot with the Dads on the Map guys when we reviewed Portobello Market. And this is definitely a game where you are interacting with other players in a shared incentive kind of way. It may not be immediately apparent via the rules as to how this happens, but we'll flesh it out in the discussion. I'm curious to get you guys' thoughts on how that plays out in this game, because you are continually shifting your alliances with different players throughout the game, depending on what's happening in a certain village and playing offense and defense there. What did you guys think about the shared incentive aspect of this game?
Yeah, so this is a concept that I feel like is somewhat unique in the sense that you really have to develop those relationships with other players at different times in order to be successful. I played this game several times and I sort of became notorious for attempting to go alone and just getting very frustrated because I was not making progress. I was getting kicked out of this space and that because I wasn't engaging with this shared incentive dynamic, trying to place your dudes out in a way to suggest to another player at the table, like, shall we? Sort of a thing. So it's really interesting the role that this plays in this game.
Yeah, these shared incentive games are just so interesting because they fly in the face of what you're normally trying to do in a game, which is get the upper hand on your opponents, right?
Yep.
But in a game like Bridges, if I'm laying a lot of tiles down in a village, let's say I have 4 or 5 maybe tiles in a village and Jason has the other 2, I got the better of it in that village for now.
Right.
Right. But the problem with that now is Jason, who's the only other person in that village with me, is totally disincentivized to help me. Really, what I want to do is I want to copy that village and paste it in another adjacent village and score myself 5 more points, right? But Jason has no interest in helping me do that because I'm getting the better of it, right?
Yeah.
And even more so, you just put a huge target on yourself, because I think one of the things that's most interesting about this game is you cannot keep pace with the table. So if you're trying to control a village by yourself and there is another nearby village and 3 people are kind of equally dispersed in that village, they're just going to steamroll you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good thing. And so I think you kind of have to play this delicate balance of, okay, I'm working with my opponents, but how do I just barely get the better of it as much as possible without trying to dominate in villages and putting a target on my back? I liked that. I think it's really cool. And this game does that well, I think.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. But one contrast to that is, if the village that Chris is moving into, even if he has more students, if those students are landing up on masters of his in the arrival village, but Jason has open spots to move his students so they become masters, it's a much better deal for him, even if he has fewer students that he's moving.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. However, I would also make the argument that if I have 4 or 5 tiles in a village and you have a couple and you're throwing in with me again and putting students with me, there's no guarantee that I'm going to move those students to the village that you want them to go to, right? That power of that third action, I think, is just so interesting. If you have students in a village, you may take them to a location that the other people who have students in that village don't want to go. Right. And so I have some control there as well. So it's a little risky, right? I may take them somewhere where you're not planning, which I think is fun.
It keeps you on your toes the entire way throughout the game, right? Students, you only have the ability to do it if you actually have students in that city. And so, whereas you may be disincentivized to jump into a location where maybe you're helping someone else if they have more tiles than you still want to have some degree of control over what's going on there, potentially, depending on the situation. And you have to take the time and invest the turns in order to get students into that place to even have the ability to influence that decision. Sure. I think that's a fascinating vision as well.
Yeah. So the flip side of that is if your opponent is initiating the journey and you can go for a ride, that just frees you up on the next turn to place masters, place students, which is huge. I think that is the name of the game, is getting those free rides, even if you maybe are not going to the village that you want to go to.
Yeah, I found an interesting option with the Journey of the Students move as well. And that was there were some times where you're on a location and you are thinking like, oh, the person with the majority there is about to move at a place where I really need them to not move it. And so what you can do is, as you see them placing students, you can basically go, my next turn, I'm going to send that thing off in a direction that I don't want them to go, just to disarm it.
Before they've had a chance to load up the train.
Exactly. Right. Because it's like, well, they're going to move it there, but they're going to move it there with 1 student, not 4 or not 3, right?
On a related topic, what did you guys make of initiating the weak side journey?
I love this in games. This idea of the null action, I think, is spectacular in this game. And so if it wasn't clear from the rules, what Chris is referring to is, so far we mostly have been talking about in these examples of when a village that is stronger is moving to a weaker one. But again, to reiterate, you can move students from a weaker to a stronger village, which doesn't replace anybody, but it will break the connection between those 2 villages, which is completely a protective move. And in the right situation can save you.
Yep.
And I love setting up those students that look like weird placements. I remember we were playing one game with Bill, and he's like, why would you put a student there? They look like weird placements, but it was solely a protective move, insurance, basically.
Right.
I love that that's an option in this game.
Yeah, speaking of shared incentive, you guys have talked in other games about those kick the can moments, and that's that perfect instance of you're looking at the guy next to you in the same village going, hey, we're both going to lose here, so what are you going to do about it? Because I'm going to place a master and score a point.
Chris loves those kind of moments.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
And I'm really glad you mentioned the phrase free ride a little bit ago. If you're always the person doing the journey of the student's action, you're probably going to lose, right?
Right.
And we had a little bit of debate about this when we were playing. I'd be interested to hear Cameron and Jason's thoughts on this, but that action does not increase your presence on the board from a chit standpoint. You're moving to different villages, but you're not actually adding chits to the board. And if you find yourself constantly being the journeyer, but not actually adding chips to the board, you will find yourself strangely behind in this game. And so I agree, Chris, it does kind of become well, I'm not moving them. Are you going to move them? Well, I'm not going to move them. It's kind of a game of chicken or who can outweight who until you get to a point where you're like, okay, I have to do it now because I have too much at risk, basically.
Right.
One of the, being the person who's always the one who's initiating them, it makes that master action, which is seemingly the weakest action. When you look at it on the surface, it's like, oh, I only get to place one tile down. I'm not moving anything around. I'm not getting into a new location. The other action lets me put 2 tiles down. So it feels like a weak action. What's interesting is that if all you're ever doing is copying from one location to another, you start to run out of chips.
Yep.
Because you don't have enough each icon in order to be able to go everywhere. And so as soon as you want to start expanding, you can't because you've run out of dragons or you've run out of Yeti masters or whatever they are, right?
Yeah.
I think that is one of the secret things that people do not realize until they play this game a few times, is that this is a secret hand management game. Knowing how many chits you have available to you, I almost think that's crucial to the gameplay, is that everybody puts out their chits in a column in front of them. It doesn't tell you to do that in setup, but just so you can see what people have and...
Have y'all ever seen that video where that guy is doing a call from his home office and the kid comes in the bedroom and the wife is like frantically running in trying to get the kid out of the building?
Wasn't it on like a news broadcast or something like that?
So funny.
Yeah, it was like a CNN or something.
Everybody with a kid totally understands that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Hold on here. All right. Sounds like it's quieted down. Yeah. So there's a strong element of hand management where you're like, if I just had one more Yeti Whisperer, you guys would be wrecked. You're just desperate. And then to make matters worse, if somebody initiates a weak side journey and you've got students locked up in a village, they're there forever because that village has been isolated and it's
wasted.
like, well, there goes my strength. Yeah.
That's like.
That's right. Yeah, I found, especially in my last play, which I actually finally did win this game, and I very intentionally made an effort to rotate between the 3 moves somewhat evenly for that reason, because I remembered in the previous plays that I would basically place out a couple of masters and then spend the rest of the game trying to replicate, right? And I ran into that hand management issue. And so what I very intentionally tried to do in that third game was, if I made it to a new location, or even sometimes if I just felt like I could afford to, I would go to one of my lesser populated locations and just take a move of, okay, I don't have a lot of clouds down. So I would intentionally go to my biggest pile and try to place a master from my biggest pile, so I didn't have that problem. And I remembered that Chris had said at one point, like, what you really want to try to do is get 3 tiles on as many locations as possible. And so I took that approach and was like, all right, I got 3 there. Okay, I'm good. I got 3 over here. I'm good. And so I used the master a lot more in that third game. And I think it made a difference.
All right. So a lot of interesting discussion here. I think we need to wrap it up, though. Why don't we move into final thoughts? Cameron, what do you think about Bridges of Shangri-La?
Yeah. So Bridges of Shangri-La really, really grew on me over my 3 plays of it. Did winning my last game have something to do with that? Probably. But I think part of that just represents that I just learned how to play better. And it took me a few tries to get the hang of things. It's safe to say that the learning curve on this game, despite its simplicity to learn to start playing, is pretty steep. There are a lot of things to account for and tactics to learn to keep from getting closed out while maximizing your reach across the board. I liked having to sort of read my opponent's turns and guess what they're going to do or try to manipulate them into going with me and so on. I think if we hadn't seen the route this game can take when everyone piles on the bandwagon and just goes student's journey every turn, this would be destined for a 5, probably, in my book. There's that much going on strategically and tactically, that much to think about and react to other players. But because it kind of seems vulnerable to that, I think that just knocked it down a peg for me. So I'm going to go with a 4.
Interesting. For me, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Okay, I'm just going to come right out and say it, that I think the game is good, and I'm giving it a 4 for now. And what I mean by that for now is I feel like I still need to play this game more. I played it quite a few times, but this is just one of those games that I feel like I still am not there on a decision because it just is so deep. And I think ultimately I will either end up giving this game a 3 or a 5 at some point in the future. And so I'm going to compromise and give it a 4 because it's interesting to me and I'm enjoying it. However, my biggest issue with the game is I'm fearful that it is formulaic. And what I mean by that is, for me at least, every time that I played this game, my thought process was get 2 or 3 chips in every village. When somebody starts laying students, follow them and hold off on the journey of students' action for as long as possible and try not to give in and just let people carry me. And I followed that formula and had a lot of success doing that. Now, I'm not going to say that I think that that's dominant or overpowered because I think there are too many interesting things going on here, specifically in the later half of the game. And I think, honestly, I need to play it with different people and maybe seeing how different people think differently about the game, that will change it for me. But maybe not. If I keep following that pattern and I keep having success, it's going to knock it down for me. So for now, I'm giving it a 4. I'm intrigued by it, but cautiously, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I know everybody's been waiting what I have to say about it. I was ready to give this a 6 right out of there's so many interesting mechanics going on. The offensive, defensive balance, trying to figure out how to insert yourself into other people's plans while still making it advantageous for yourself and not just helping them along. So many cool things to think about in this game. When we played it the second time, my opinion dropped significantly, but that was because I think we ran into a groupthink issue where we were all thinking that a particular route was the way to go, and it became the way to go in that game. That does mean that I think this game potentially suffers from a fragility. If all the players at the table following and playing in the same exact manner, I think it can fall into a pattern that maybe makes the game not broken, less fun. And so ultimately, for me, I think I fall into the similar to where you're at, Chris. I feel like I need to play it a little bit more because we played it a third time and my opinion went back up after playing it that time because it felt like we were not falling into that same. And I think I'm giving it a 4. I think it could improve over time, but I need time to suss that out. I still think there's a lot of fascinating stuff going on in this game. So I think it's a shot for likes these shared incentive type. Give it a try.
All right, Chris K, tell us how we're all wrong.
Cool. Well, if people have been following the Hidden Gems Geek list, they know I like to fan the flames, add to Chris's paranoia that he gives too many games 6s. But this time I'm going to be the 6 guy. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do Colovini for the episode that I was on. I just think Bridges of Shangri-La is a masterpiece. By far and away, Leo Colovini's his magnus opus for sure. Not to say that there aren't cons. I know there are a lot of people out there, for whatever reason, don't like that woo-woo theme or art. I think it's fantastic. I love saying Yeti Whisperer. It's abstract. Regardless of what you think of the theme or art, it's dry for sure. And there's not a lot of variability apart from how players see their pieces initially and where the game takes you from there. For me, Shangri-La is a game about finding equilibrium in the eye of the storm. And you have to eke out these advantages when there's just all this stuff flying around you. And you have to be nimble and change plans at a moment's notice when an opportunity pops up. Yeah, Bridges of Shangri-La, top tier, great game, all-timer.
Said first episode on, coming out with a 6. I love it.
As long as you don't give 2 6s in the same episode like me, you won't be as notorious. Maybe you will. We'll see.
Just got one more game.
Well, for folks out there who are very intrigued by the broad spectrum of reviews that they just heard and want to give Bridges of Shangri-La a try, where can folks find it?
Oh boy, this is a tough one to find. It is pretty rare. Unfortunately, there are no copies available at Noble Knight, our friends at Noble Knight. And the last time I checked, there are only 2 copies on the BGG marketplace right now. And one of them is $35, which is a steal for this game, in my opinion. But get it while you can, because it is not very available. Would love to see it get reprinted at some point, but I don't know. It just seems like games like this just don't get reprinted really anymore, unfortunately.
If you are desperate to find this game, I will say that I see copies pop up semi-regularly on eBay. That's in the U.S., but that might be another avenue to look into.
Hey, Metropolis got the reprint treatment. You never know.
That is true. That is a good point.
Did it though?
That's also a good point.
Shots
Is it
fired.
even Metropolis anymore? The more I look
It's a good topic for a backstage.
Well, it's on the list. For those of you out there who aren't on Patreon yet and haven't heard our backstage episodes, we have that one on the list to talk about the reprint of Metropolis. So maybe that's something you want to check out. Patreon.com/Hidden Gems podcast.
Yeah, hopefully Roxley didn't turn it into a gaudy monstrosity, but tune in to find out.
Good plug, Cameron.
Well, those are our thoughts on the Bridges of Shangri-La.
You know what? I forgot to say, I wanted to mention too my final thoughts that I love this game so much. I rewrote the flavor text.
Oh, man.
I don't even care about flavor text. And I was like, you know what? This game, I just gotta.
Now you have to read it on air, and we're gonna stitch this back into your final thoughts.
Absolutely, you do. Yeah,
that would be amazing.
I'm
We're
ready.
Leave this in afterwards.
I'm ready whenever you are.
Put it in the bloopers section.
As dramatically as you possibly can.
Okay, I don't have the Richard Attenborough stuff going on here. Let me see if I can find it.
We can turn our cameras off for a second if that'll help.
Sure, I've buried it somewhere on my computer.
I just want to know, does your flavor text still include the invisible bridge blaster?
Oh, 100%. Right.
All right, let's go.
All right, okay. Long ago, Shangri-La was inhabited by the wisest scholars in the world. One day, however, these wise scholars mysteriously vanished, with only one remaining, the invisible bridge blaster. Upon learning this news, the 4 neighboring clans of Rotaria, Palau, Gilden, and Lilamas seized their chance. They dispatched their most astute priests, astrologers, healers, rainmakers, firekeepers, dragon breeders, and even their Yeti whisperers on an enlightening pilgrimage to the fabled Shangri-La.
Ooh, well done.
Nice.
Tracers.
Love it.
That was so good.
That's awesome.
So much better.
You're hired.
You're hired. Cameron's out.
Love it. Let's make it
There you go. There you go.
"2,500 years ago, Greek traders and adventurers traveled to southern Italy to settle and develop the area. They called the region Magna Grecia. The development of the area led to an era of rapid cultural and economic growth. Before the arrival of the Greeks, the region was populated by only a few small isolated villages. The region's rich soil, navigable rivers, great forests, and bronze and silver mines offered the Greeks enormous development potential. In time, the Greeks built great cities such as Tarentum, Syracuse, Catania, Locri, and Naxos. There were also numerous small villages, many of which have disappeared or were swallowed whole by the growing cities. They built a dense network of roads to support trade and the prosperous markets in the cities. With success came strong rivalries among the cities, especially as they competed for the intentions of the oracles for the fame they offered.
Syracuse.
David Attenborough's back.
The cheetah in his den does not know.
It's a magnificent creature.
All right. Magna Grecia, published in 2003 by Venice Connection and Rio Grande Games. Designers, Leo Colovini, of course, and Michael Schacht. another designer that's worthy of the Hidden Gems treatment. BGG ranking 3,673. So rule summary for Magna Grecia. I asked Chris if I could do one of the rules explanations, and surprisingly, he gave me the most difficult game of the three. I'm sure he never does that to anybody else, Jason, right?
Never,
I always take the hard ones.
What? No. Well, maybe the more complex ones, but you give me the weird ones that are hard to explain.
Well, no, it's a hierarchy. So the first thing I try to figure out is if it's the game Jason hates, he gets that one. If there's not one of those, then I give him the hardest one, and then it's the weirdest one, and then after that, it's just a toss-up. But that's usually my general mental order when I decide things.
That's good to know. I faked you out on Bridges this time.
All right, so if it wasn't clear from the flavor text, Magna Grecia is a city and route building game where players are essentially trying to do two things. The first is build markets, represented by octagonal cylinders, and they want to connect these markets to various locations. Villages, which are hexes that are pre-printed on the board without any city tiles on them. And then cities, which are city tiles that have been placed on top of village hexes. And then oracles. So the board is a rectangle of hexes. Before the game begins, players are going to distribute a certain number of oracle pieces, depending on player count, in some of the village hexes. And then players will also start with some amount of points, again, depending on player count. Players will have 3 types of pieces: road tiles, city tiles, and markets. In their supply, they have all their markets, but only 4 road tiles and 4 city tiles. The rest of these tiles are in their reserve. The game's going to play out over 12 rounds, marked by action tiles. And the action tiles dictate 2 things. First is turn order. So there's a column in the center of the tile that has the player colors listed from top to bottom. So whoever's on top is going to go first, and then the second one, second, and so on. The other thing the action tile has is the strength of the 3 types of actions. So a player's going to take their turn, pass the action tile to the next player until everyone's gone, and that will mark the end of the round. So like I said, there's 3 actions. Players can choose 2 of those. So one is to build roads coming out of players' own cities, opponent cities, or out of villages or oracle hexes that the player's already connected to. The second thing they can do is they can found and or develop a city. Placing city tiles on a village hex will be founding a city. You can only do this once per round, which is really important to remember. And if you're developing, you're basically enlarging a previously founded city. Every city tile place costs the player 1 point. If you're founding a city, you immediately place a market on the city for free. The final action players can take is resupply. Finally, at the end of a player's turn, they have a couple of optional actions to choose from: to build a market or sell a market. So if you're building a market, you can place the market anywhere in a village or opponent city where you do not already have a market. And that's going to cost you a certain number of points depending on how many active markets and how many city tiles are in that city. If you don't want to build, you could optionally sell a market. So if you're selling a market, the market must be active, meaning the market has to be either in your city or have a direct connection to their city. The player lays down the market on its side to show it's sold, and then scores points equal to the number of locations. So again, that's village hexes, cities, and oracles that the city touches. So like I said, the game ends when the 12th action tile has been played. Any inactive or sold markets are removed. Players are going to score 4 points per city that has captured the attention of an oracle, which basically means that the city directly connects to the oracle, and it's the largest city connected. And they're going to score points for each active market equal to the number of direct connections to locations, just as when a player sells a market. And that's basically how you play Magna Grecia.
Oh, no. You used another word. I like it.
Yeah, the new adverb.
Okay, man, I got to do something fresh.
Right? Be you. You got to create your own thing for when you're on next time. Right?
All right. So this game has a lot of different facets to it. But one thing in particular that stood out to me in this game is the markets. They're just such a huge part of the game, a huge part, obviously, of the scoring. How did things go for you guys in terms of internalizing the way markets work and how to use them to your advantage?
Yeah. So for me, it took me, I think, until my 3rd play to fully grok that concept. I struggled to just get it down. I kept making turns and being like, oh, shoot, that market's not scoring. I understood that you have to optimistically place the markets out where you think they're going to be available, but I didn't connect the other side of it, literally, where you aren't going to score it, even if a city gets built there, if you don't connect it to some city that you own. And it has to be direct. It's not through one of your other cities. You have to be directly connected to it. And that took me, for some reason, far too long to understand.
I think folks who are used to playing train games, perhaps this game could take a little bit of adjustment, just because for some of the reasons that you mentioned, Cameron, right? Which a market being active is dependent on it being connected to one of your cities. However, the roads that connect it to that don't have to be your own. So it could be anybody's road.
That's the thing that messed me up the most.
And it has to be immediately connected to. It's not part of your network, like your train route network. It has to be a direct connection, but it could be somebody else's direct connection. I mean, once you understand those ideas, they're simple, right? But I think if you're coming into a game like this, used to train games where you're network building, it flips it on its head a little bit.
I will say in the several games that I played, even players who'd played it multiple times, I was still asking them if they really wanted to put a market there, because I was like, you've got one chance to connect that. And that chance is dwindling by the second. Like, are you sure? And they're like, oh.
Yeah,
right.
I think sometimes people just lose sight of the fact that they need to be active because they just see the value of the market, right? If you've got a city that's got a lot of connections going in and out of it, that's just points potential. But you're totally right. You have to find a way to be able to make that market even be able to score. And that's a whole other thing to consider, not to mention the fact that, at least in my experience in this game, you have about 7 other things you know that you need to do on your turn other than activate that market.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's just so much great tension in this game of like, okay, I won't connect at this turn. I'll just wait a turn and do something else. And then you get to the next turn and you're like, okay, I think I can get away with one more turn. I really need to do this thing on the other side of the board. And then you screw yourself, right?
You're like, well, now it's impossible.
Exactly.
I don't know what that's like. That never happened.
But you're just gripped with hard choices because on your turn there are so many things that you feel like you need to do, and not just placing tiles, but even resupplying. And that's actually something I want to segue into. How did you guys feel about that action selection part of the game with the tiles, right? So you've got placing the cities, placing the rows, but you also have the resupply, right? It's an action, but you're not doing anything active on the board, but you have to do it, right? How did you all feel about that part of it?
I like this part a lot, which I guess some people could see as a plus or a minus. One of the things that made such a painful decision is it's variable every round, right? It's not guaranteed to be the same strength of action. So the resupply might be you get 5 tiles, but the next round it might be you get 1 tile or you get 2 tiles. And there could be a long period of time where you're not getting the opportunity to resupply a large amount. And so when that tile comes up, the 5 resupply, it's like, oh, I feel like I need to do it, but there's so many other things I want to do right now. Surely another one's coming. So I can hold out.
It never fails. Every time that 5 resupply comes out, it's like the exact moment where you're like, but I have to build this city now, right?
Yep.
And you just are gripped with this hard choice.
One thing that I appreciate is you do get to see the next round's action tile.
What?
You do? Is that the rules?
Yeah. Yeah, so you flip over 2, and the top one is the one where you take those actions, and then you get to see
oh
man, I totally would have won one of the games we played if I known
that. Oh, is that right?
That was Jason's obligatory line at this moment.
I had $1 for every time Jason said how he would have won a game.
I would have won.
I paid my student
no.
If this hadn't happened,
that's
I totally
Bill's
would have
line.
won.
That's Bill's line.
So you're kind of handicapping yourselves if you don't have that up.
So you're just saying that we played the harder version of
you
this.
You can kind of look ahead. Exactly. Yeah. So
advanced.
It wasn't an asterisk win. It was whoever won.
Really won.
Won with one hand tied behind their back. Yeah. So I think for us, when we were playing, when that 5 came up, probably 75% of the table is doing the enhanced resupply. Did you guys take advantage of the enhanced action? I mean, it's the least sexy move when you take that enhanced resupply. You're like, cool,
Yeah.
But I'm getting 7 tiles, which at the right moment that could just set you up for the next.
Yeah,
2,
we
3
did see
turns.
a few uses of the enhance action that I thought were well done, where it's just a well timed placement of, say, like that one extra road that maybe blocks somebody or makes a connection in this turn, so I don't have to worry about it next turn, like that type of thing. It's easy to forget about too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the road building, Cameron, because this is something that I feel like I was appreciating more and more the more we played it, was just how absolutely brutal this road building can be.
Mm-hmm.
And using that road building offensively to block people out from hooking into an oracle, which oracle scoring is hugely important in this game. And being able to deny somebody access to an oracle just because you build your road to nowhere just so it's in their way is critically important, I think, in this game, and a fun aspect of the game, which can create lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth, which I particularly enjoy.
Yeah, it's super mean in that way, right? Because you see somebody who's just punted on connecting that market to make it active. And like I mentioned earlier, their options are dwindling. And you're like, I could just build this road out of their city, and they just wasted 2-3 points. That is hugely demoralizing.
And as you said, just a single road. That's what's nice about this game is you don't have to make connections. You can just build roads to nowhere and just end them, which can create just chaotic, mean situations.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was interested to hear you say, Chris, that you thought oracles were hugely valuable, because I was going to ask you guys if you thought oracles are a trap.
I'll let Jason answer this question.
Ooh.
Because Jason has had a lot to say about oracles when we've played the game, so I'll let him speak to this.
Yeah. Now that you asked the question, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. My thought, at least, was that it was the opposite. That it almost felt like oracles were overpowered just in the amount of points that they award. It felt the winner of each of us was the person who had the most oracle. And it's not that you can ignore the city scoring, because you certainly can't in order to be in the running. But it felt it came down to oracles every time. And that could be just perception. I'm not even saying that that's necessarily a downside of the game, because they're definitely there for a reason and meant to be focused on. And if you ignore them at your own peril, right? I think that they are hugely valuable and almost essential to win. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it now.
Did you guys want to jump in, or should I?
Go ahead, Cameron.
Should I go for it?
Oh, I was going to say, I think I'm eager to hear what Chris is going to say.
Yeah, me too. I'll defer.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to discount oracles. I think they are important to scoring. I think in our games, you needed to have 2 or 3, probably by game's end, to be in the running. And I do like the mechanism of the oracles in the games, because they give players focus, right? It'd be too hard if it was just a game about markets. There's a lot of speculation that happens with markets, and they may or may not go anywhere. But the oracles are kind of like a surefire bet. You're like, I know if I build the city up big enough and I get there soon enough, that it'll be a lot of points for somebody to try to take this away from me. I think I've just seen too many people think of this as an oracle game and not a market game. They kind of ignore markets. Again, when you buy a market, you can put that anywhere on the board. It could be in a village space, could be with another player's market, it could be in an opponent's city. So getting in early on the ground floor and even working with that opponent to make those connections, it provides those delicious shared incentive common space moments. We're doing all the dads on a map dog whistles tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad you the market economy. I think one of the most fascinating things about this is your point economy, because every time you place a city out on the board or place a market onto an existing city, you're spending points to do that. And you start with 15 points, but you eventually start to run out of those points. It forces you to be very wise about how you spend those points and about how you set yourself up to regain points by selling markets. And at the same time, all throughout that, you're doing that speculation thing of, okay, well, it's going to cost 4 points to drop a market into this already well-established city that 2 other players have markets in. Is that worth it or is it not, depending on where that city is going to go? Right?
And then I got to spend actions connecting it, making a direct connection to my city if it's not mine.
Yeah, that push and pull of, okay, well, I have to spend 4 points, which is 4 less points now that I have to spend building markets and building cities elsewhere in order to even get in to this location, right? And then you're trying to weigh, all right, is it worth it or is it not? I found that fascinating.
So anybody have any negatives? Anything you didn't like about this one? I see Chris K shaking his head very adamantly, so go ahead, man.
Oh man, well, I feel like I've been talking a lot, but people got to know the art. I've heard a lot of melted cheese comments, the yellow game. This game is just hard on people who are colorblind. The colors are brown, yellow, orange, and red, and they're all on yellow tiles. It's just tough to read, even for people who aren't colorblind. I feel like it's tough
I'm
to read.
speaking a little bit of ignorance because we don't have anybody that's colorblind in our group. But do you have somebody in your group that is? Can they even play this game?
I don't, but I went to a con and played it with a guy, and I mentioned that, and I was like, see, this is an active market because this is a red market in a red city. And he was like, oh, I didn't even realize the city had colors.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Okay.
It's definitely an interesting color palette choice. Autumn theme or something. But yeah, the yellow roads on yellow tiles thing. It's very, it just makes it dry as dust.
Yeah, and on a similar note too, I did find that by the end of the game, when you've placed out all these tiles everywhere, I felt like it became really difficult to sort of analyze remaining moves and figure out what's possible. I found myself falling into some pretty gritty analysis paralysis on the end of the game. And literally, I think one game Chris was like, there, that's the only move. That's the move right there. You can do it or I'm going to do it. Because I just literally, I was like, I know there's got to be something I can do on my final turn. So yeah.
15 minute long turn.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess I probably should have. So I would start by saying, and I say this somewhat cautiously because Cameron has not given his final thoughts yet, but I would say for the most part, if theme and aesthetics are important to you, you probably should just stay away from this game, to be quite honest. I mean, you're just not going to get it here at all, okay? It's not visually appealing. It has graphic design issues, and it's not thematic really at all. It did not feel like I was building a civilization at all. Now, having said that, I think this game is fantastic. I love it. It's my favorite game of the three, and it's not even close, really. I'm going to give this game a 5. I gave Faye a 5 also, but I think this game is better than Faye. And the main reason is this game is tense. It is tense. I felt it from the opening bell. I was constantly nervous about getting blocked, getting cut off, not being able to make the connections I need to make, somebody stealing these oracles from me and overtaking me. Do I resupply now or do I push my luck? I really need to connect into this thing, but I'm really running low on tiles. What do I do? Like the whole game just felt that way. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for, because if I can make it work, I feel extreme satisfaction from that. I want to feel that angst, and this game has it heavily. And so for me, I think this game is awesome. So 5 for me.
Stole my thunder a little bit, Chris.
Oh, no.
No, it's fine. I think this game's fantastic as well. I was tempted to give this game a 6.
Me too.
But I settled on a 5. I think mainly because there's maybe just a little bit of the special sauce isn't refined that makes me like, I have to play that game again, like somebody that I've rated a 6. But there's so much good stuff going on in this game. It was definitely not the one of these 3 games that I expected to like the most, especially when I saw it for the first time. I was like, what is this? I came into this kind of thinking I was going to like Bridges the most. And
me too.
I gave it a 4. This was a surprise hit for sure. Definitely the hiddenest of the hidden gems on. So yeah, really enjoyed this one for all the reasons we've already talked about. Definitely recommend it.
I'll go next. I think a lot of times you read the rules for the game and you have a sense of what it's going to be like. And this kind of reminded me of when you guys talked about Chronos. I could read the rules. I get how the game works, what the actions are like, but you just don't know what all the possibilities are until you have a few plays under your belt. So there's a lot of those peel back the onion moments to Magna Grecia. And for me, I think that is a game with a lot of staying power. I'm also a sucker for route building. 2 of my favorites games that I recommended for the show were Hellas and Cavum. And this has got that paired with that thing that flows in the opposite direction, which is building up cities to grab oracles. So that creates a wholly unique contrast. If I really had any gripes, it's more with production, the quality of life stuff that could be done to improve the game. But yeah, for me, it's a 5. Maybe I'm in a bit of a honeymoon phase, but I think Magna Grecia is the kind of game that it leaves your head spinning after you play it.
Right. So I feel like there is a bit of a theme in these games. A theme, not theme, but a theme between these games, which is that of seeing games grow on me with subsequent plays. I hated my first play of Magna Grecia. Hated it. I was in a foul mood. It was like, If you haven't listened to Backstage, we just talked about that. I was a cranky guy afterward. I was sure.
You were mad.
I was sure that I was going to give it a 2. I just got rocked. I was dead last. I had no clue what I was doing. Even by the end of the game, I was like, I don't even know what I was doing. I had so many orphaned markets on the map. I was just getting randomly shoved into last place and was getting my moves taken away from me or made more expensive or whatever. But then I played it again and things clicked a little bit more. I think I finished second that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think playing it again, more things would continue to click. And I guess my takeaway is that sometimes games just take a while or take making blunders and feeling out of it in order to understand and observe what works for other players. But the other thing that improved Magna Grecia for me was realizing that you're never really safe. Whatever you do, if you lock down an oracle, it ain't locked down.
No.
Someone can take it away from you. If you
Everything is threatened.
Yes. If you think you've got something good going on, well, it might be taken away from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a fascinating thing. I enjoyed playing Magna Grecia in the end. For a game as tough and complex as it is, I felt like I grew into it and could compete and have fun trying to at least carve out a solid spot by the end, even if I didn't win. And I think it says a lot about a game if you're like, I didn't win, but it was fun. So yeah. I'm going to go with a 4.
Wow.
I'm not going to probably sing a song about it to my friends, but except for I'm making a podcast about it and telling them how it's a 4.
I feel like that says a lot coming from you, though, Cameron, because this style of game is generally your go-to, right?
It's
so
not.
I feel like a 4 from you on a game is more than that.
That's right. Thank you.
The grand scheme of things.
Thank you. I couldn't figure out how to say that because, yeah, this usually isn't my favorite, but in the end, I had a good time. I was engaged. I was interested.
I'm floored right now. I think that just speaks to, again, like Jason was saying, to just how awesome this game is. We talk about this a lot on Hidden Gems, but when you can find a game that gets better when you play it, that, in my opinion, is a rare thing. I feel like so often I'll play a game, and the more I play it, the worse it gets. You know what I mean? Because you feel like you start to figure it out. These Colovini games, there's something about the way he designs them that every time I play, I feel like I was learning, you know? I learned something, and it just got better and better. That's good stuff.
Yeah, and it wasn't just optimizing or being more efficient, right? It was learning new tricks, new ways to better your own spot or take down an opponent.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not like I learned how to play the red faction more efficiently in whatever game. Scythe, Cameron. It's it's different.
I've never learned to play a faction efficiently in that game.
And here's a game where the most recent Board Game Geek forum post was from 2 years ago, and then prior to that, it was 10 years ago. So
it's crazy.
Man, that's some real
hidden gems got the paddles
right
out on Magna Grecia. Let's go. Let's get this thing going. I want to see this on Instagram, people.
Show us your
Daniel,
cheese board.
Marcus, I'm talking to you guys. Let's see them. Get a copy.
All right. Well, if they want to get a copy, where can they get it?
So good news. There's 1 copy on Noble Knight and 23 copies listed on BGG as of this recording. So it is available. It's out there.
It
is a big box.
$15 on BGG, I might add, which is a steal for this game.
That's what happens when games look like this. No one wants to buy them.
It's true.
God, let's wrap this episode up.
Yeah. All right.
We're pushing our luck here.
Yep. Who wants to do it?
And those are our thoughts.
Those are our thoughts on Magna Grecia.
Those are our thoughts on Magna Grecia.
All right. Now do one where we aren't overlapping each other.
What if we all did at the same time?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right. And those are our thoughts on Magna Grecia.
You know I'm leaving all that in, right?
Sure. Go for it.
Well, thank you for joining us on this special episode of Hidden Gems with special guest, our BGG Guild manager, Chris K., better known on BGG as Gidorah. If you like what we're doing here, please remember that it's a huge help to us if you would leave us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice and follow us on our various social media platforms. Those simple things can make a difference for this show's exposure so more folks can enjoy exploring games with us. Check out the BGG Guild if you want to interact with us or share a game that you think is a hidden gem. And if you're so inclined, please consider supporting the show over at patreon.com/Hidden Gems Podcast or purchasing a Hidden Gems t-shirt on our website at hiddengemsboardgamepodcast.com/store. Until next time, I'm your host, Cameron.
This is Chris.
This is Jason.
And this is Gidorah, Chris.
Thanks for listening. This episode of Hidden Gems, number 37, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina on August 7, 2022. Join us again in 3 weeks when we talk about the husband and wife designer dream team of Inca and Marcus Brand and review 3 of their lesser talked about games. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our Board Game Geek Guild is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Gidorah. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Katelyn Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Katelyn Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram at hiddengems.podcast, and Twitter at Hidden Gems Board. Disagree with one of our reviews? Have something you want to say about one of the games we discussed today? You can also make your voice heard on our Board Game Geek Guild at boardgamegeek.com, guild number 3874. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems, and until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search.